All right. So what we're talking about is modern and current issues. And I gave you the list of issues last week. The ones that we usually approach and believe that they're simply opinion-based issues. Remember what I told you when I said the next step beyond this class, what that is last week? Ethics. When you take what you can prove is true, and then you move to the next level, which is then what do you do with that data, that information? That's ethics. Ethics is opinion-based. It's not purely opinion-based as long as the foundation of the ethics is truth, right? But it is opinion-based, and that's why basically this isn't a class about ethics. Although we will probably use it to segue at some points because that's homework, right? What we'll try to do is show what we can prove, what can we absolutely prove or not prove in each area. And then we will take that, and that's like homework. That's okay, how do I apply that information? Because I think the application is really important. What's amazing to me is, you know, in the 21st century, unlike the 20th century, don't you think there's been some kind of unpegging or unhinging of our viewpoints? You know, if you read the Enlightenment literature, how certain were these people of truths in their universe? If you read, well, probably not a good example is Jefferson, but if you at least, read George Washington or Mason or any of the Enlightenment figures. How about Newton? How about Anastasius? How about go even further back? How about Augustine? Well, forget those. I guess those are more age of faith. But look in the age of reason, age of Enlightenment figures. How certain was Newton of what he knew was true? Incredibly certain. That's what he based his research on. How about the founding fathers of this nation? How certain were they? They were absolutely certain. Their writings, well, we don't read their writings anymore in schools, do we? But their writings were absolutely certain. If you read the second address of George Washington to the nation on his inauguration, or you read his second inaugural address, or you read his final address to the nation as the President of the United States after his second term, you'll see that he absolutely knew what he believed. So has logic and reason really changed that much? Has science changed that much? Especially for the common person. Is any of you doing probability mechanics to try to figure out what you're going to do tomorrow?
No.
Most of you aren't even using Newtonian mathematics, right? How many of you are doing force equations? I mean, I do it every now and then, but that's my y'all, right? But are you?
No.
So, you know, Newton, everything that Newton knew, all the founding fathers knew, but yet truth is so elusive today. The reason is because they have failed, we have failed to teach, and I think I've mentioned why, and I'll get into more detail as we go along. They failed to teach the three means of knowing truth. There are three ways of knowing truth. We talked about two specifically, and we mentioned the third last week. The scientific method, the legal historical method, and logic. And what I want to do today is focus on logic. So today, looking at logic. Now let's talk about this. Remember we said, how do you know truth in the physical world? There are two ways to know truth in the physical world. Remember that diagram that I put together? I said, how do you know truth? So how do you know truth in the physical world? Scientific method and the legal historical method. The scientific method is used for repeatable events. The legal historical method is used for non-repeatable, unique events. Okay? So in the physical world, we can know truth. And you know it's true because if I go and flip that switch for the lights, what happens to the lights? They go on or off. And every time they go on or off, okay, and the minute they don't go off, what do you say?
Power's
The power's off, or the light bulb is busted, right? That is called the scientific method. Now, when I uniquely turn on those lights, that was the legal historical method, and if we record it, ooh. Do you mean that I have to have the legal historical method to do the scientific method? Yes, I have to. This is what blows me away about the empiricists today, or those who say they're empiricists, empirically minded. Because without the legal historical method, the scientific method is worthless. You have to be able to record your events. So how you can become a scientist, and by the way, most scientists aren't as foolish as this, but how you can be a scientist today and say, to me, empiricism only means scientific method. That's insane. Because every time they write in their logbook, they are creating a legal historical record of their scientific events. So they support one another. Now, the other one we talked about is logic. And logic is a key. Let's look at logic. And I think when I ended, I'd given you this, how do you do logical arguments? So logic, when we do logic, and remember, the most important thing about logic is, does logic reside in the physical universe? Is it used to prove concepts in the physical universe? No. It is not used for events in the physical universe. It has application in the physical universe. But what is the purpose of logic?
To know what we cannot know.
To be able to discern things that are outside of physical reality. And just so we don't get unpegged here, every single one of you are right now existing outside of physical reality.
I've wondered about that from time to time.
Yourself, right? The reason is because what are you doing right now that I cannot prove?
Thinking.
You are thinking. Now, science tells us, or not thinking. Uh-oh, Tammy's not thinking. Uh-oh. She's writing.
Confession time.
She's actually,
She is thinking.
she is taking words and turning it into symbol logic in her brain. These are really complex things that we rarely think about. But if you are writing down something, what are you doing?
Historical notes.
You're translating
Well, you're-
your thoughts into a
you-
physical thing.
You're doing legal historical, but that's right. What you're doing is you are listening. If you're writing notes about what I'm writing and not doodling, okay, you are taking what you hear. So you are perceiving something physically. It is going into your brain. The words that I use, which are not symbol logic, right? It's not symbol logic. I am giving you, and boy, if you start with my process, now we're even getting deeper. But let's start with this. So the words which are waveforms, they are sonic waveforms, okay, that are physical, are coming from my mouth. They are impinging on your ears. Your ears are translating them to your brain. You are turning them into words. You are not turning them into word pictures, are you? You're turning them into words. This is very important because many of you might imagine that we think in word pictures. We don't. The minute I say chair, what do you see?
The word.
C-H-A-I-R. You don't see a chair, do you? Pre-literate people see a chair, and we're going to talk about that. But what's important is you are turning those words into, you're turning my physical sonic sounds into words in your brain. Your brain is processing those words. They are becoming thoughts. I know 20% of you are not getting what I'm saying. Pareto principle. Not because you're not smart, not because you may be thinking about dinner, you may be thinking about something else. But Pareto principle tells us that 20% of everyone, or at least maybe 20% of my words are falling on deaf ears, as we say in our vernacular. You're not processing them. Hopefully, I'm going to try to process enough. I'll repeat it enough so you process it enough that you'll get it all, right? This is important. But you are turning those words into thoughts. I can't measure those thoughts. I can measure electricity. I can measure brain use, brain things going on in your brain. But I can't measure those thoughts. And you're having emotions. Maybe you're mad at me. Maybe you're happy. Maybe you're like, wow, this is cool stuff. Maybe you're like, this guy is a nuthead, all right? But the point is that you're having emotions. I can't prove those emotions either. All of these things lie. And if I ask you, well, what do you think? You're going to lie to me? You know? Right? Well, maybe you won't. Maybe you will. How do I know? I don't know. That's the point. Then, if you're going to put it on paper, you've got to take those thoughts and turn them into words, and those words then into symbolic forms, symbols, right? Letters and words and paragraphs and sentences, etc., etc., etc. The process of thinking, the process of hearing, the process of thinking is unbelievably complex. How can we explain that within science? Well, science struggles. But yet we know it happens all the time, right? How can we know these things? We know these things through logic. And how do we do logic? Let me see. I had some run up here. Yeah, let's do the undergirding. Here's another way of approaching this problem. Einstein's paradox. Anybody know what Einstein's paradox is? You ever heard of it? Einstein's paradox? Good. Well, no, maybe that's good.
Close speed of light, but rate of mass.
Einstein's paradox is this. Einstein discovered that the undergirding of all of reality is probability. Probability, remember I talked about the Heisenberg equation? I mean, this is good stuff, get this scientific stuff, right? But in the Heisenberg equation, where is the electron of an atom? Anywhere it wants to be. That's exactly correct. And the Heisenberg equation is a probability-based equation. And therefore, when Einstein was doing his whole thing with light and with reality and with the world, what it all came down to, and he pictured it as, Einstein said he did not believe that God rolled dice. This is called Einstein's paradox. In other words, how can the physical universe be a universe that is cohesive and yet based in probability? How can it? Actually, it can. Because what is probability? I already said it. If you want to do a Heisenberg equation is an equation in mathematics, right? Mathematics governs logic, right? Or actually, logic governs mathematics. So therefore, in a Heisenberg equation, all I have to do is put in probability, right? Now, let's think about this. What do we view, and I'll write this down first. I'll start with this. In logic, we always have definitions. Definitions. We have assumptions. And we have arguments. And we have conclusions. And by the way, as we've studied in Greek, in our Greek, this is logos, and this is telos. Okay? The Greek way of thinking is embodied in logic. So, for example, let's take a definition. We define God as
Supreme being.
supreme being, but what? God is perfect, right? God is perfect. What's mathematics? I mean, just pure mathematics. It's perfect, right? Mathematics is perfect. If I say, and remember we talked about set theory, but I'll give you the simple one. If we say 1 plus 1 equals 2 in mathematics, 1 plus 1 within set theory constraints always equals 2. An equation as defined under assumptions, and that's what we're talking about, definitions and assumptions. Equation of a parabola always ends with a what? A parabola, right? an equation will always, well, an equation that is solvable will always have a solution. And the solution will not vary, right? If it has a singular solution. There are equations that have multiple solutions. We know that. But even so, those multiple solutions don't vary until we put in probability. So in Newtonian mathematics, in Newtonian equations, the world is perfect. And then we get to Einstein. And suddenly the world is undergirded with probability. Okay, this is very important. Because if you look at God, do you remember? The Logos. I'll remind you in the classes. The pastor mentioned I thought was very interesting today. Because if you look at Genesis 1 and 2, it says, in the beginning was God. And actually it's Elohim, gods, with a singular verb. So gods with a singular verb. In the beginning was gods with a singular verb. Singular verb meaning it is a singular concept, but it is a plural noun. So in the beginning, Elohim. And the Ruach, the Spirit of God, rested on the waters. And God, the Septuagint says, and God Logos.
Logical statement.
Which, by the way, John says in the beginning was the
Word.
Logos. I hate it when they say word. Logos. Our translation says Logos. The New Testament Greek says Logos. In the beginning was Logos. So in the beginning, in Genesis, we have Father, Son, Holy Spirit, all encapsulated. And the Septuagint puts this very clearly. The point being that what we have is we have a God that is perfect, and we have this logos idea, this logical argument that the Greeks express within the concept of the Septuagint, and we in the New Testament have, because we have the John word, right, the logos being the word of God. So God is perfect. God is like mathematics. God is like Newtonian mathematics. But then all of a sudden, I have a problem. And that problem is probability. What does it sound like probability could be? What changed the world?
Sin.
Sin.
What does it sound like probability could be?
Sin.
Sin. The original sin.
The world is different than God created it, isn't it? Because there is something within that matrix that isn't right. Now, why do I point this out? I point this out because, do you see in what we're looking at, as we're looking at things, Einstein had a paradox. And yet we just took logic, in a more complexly than I'm going to do in the other parts of the class, but we just took logic, we made it some definitions, some pretty simple definitions, we did some assumptions, and we answered his paradox. Because how can probability undergird the world? Because of sin, right? And that fits within our understanding of classical theology, doctrinal. I don't like to talk about theology or doctrine much. Yeah.
Chronologically, when did the fall occur?
After the creation.
So the serpent was not there. The fall, Satan and God had their tiff after creation.
Well, this is, well, they had to, because
Well,
When-
they have
when-
to if what you said is
well,
true.
when were the angels created? See, now we're talking about things that have a pen, because we're talking about things that are very difficult to prove, and that's the point. Okay, what we have just done is we've done something that's very interesting. What sphere? Now, the sphere that I was talking about, in general, although I did bring in some biblical concepts into it, but the sphere I was generally talking about was what?
Physical.
Physical mathematics, right?
What we know.
And I was bringing in some ideas, some definitions that were outside of that perfect sphere. But then what did you just bring into it?
Well, you extended that to logic.
Well, I
And
was
the point
explaining-
is that what the statements that you have are logical
Yeah.
if the fall occurred after creation. And when were the angels created? Prior or after creation?
Well, the angels had to be created during the creation, right?
Definition of create.
Right. So, but in any case, what we've done is something I want you to see, because this is what we're talking. This is the main thing we're going to talk about today. The most important thing to recognize, and this is why you lose your arguments. Well, and I'm not saying you're going to lose your argument, but this is the reason that we as Christians lose our arguments. Because when we talk about logic, definitions, assumptions, arguments, and conclusions only apply within a construct, what we'll call a construct. So, if I have a construct, so for example, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll try to make it the right number. If I have, let's say, an Old Testament construct, and this, by the way, is the construct that was taught by the Truth Project. Truth Project. If I go to a secular person within the construct of the Old Testament, New Testament, and I tell them, when you say to them, I'm going to talk to you about something important, and they say, well, where does this information come from? You tell them from the Bible. And they tell you what? I don't believe in the Bible. Right? This is a construct. The problem is if you try to argue with a secular person within this construct, you will always lose. You cannot win within this construct. Because what will their answer be? Well, what about the Bhagavad Gita? As a matter of fact, we could add the Bhagavad Gita as one of our constructs, or the Quran, right? But we generally like to live in this construct because we have a foundation of belief, right? It's a foundation of belief. And so we can argue how many angels on heaven's hand, or when did creation occur, or when did, angels, how many angels, when were angels created, or, you know what I'm saying? I'm not making fun of you. I'm just pointing out that in this construct, we can have a lot of interesting discussions that may or may not be important to a secular person at all. Do you see? And the problem is, the minute we get into that, see, I can talk about biblical things with you guys. Why?
Because we all believe.
You believe it, right? But if I'm trying to talk to somebody that's not minded that way, or doesn't think that way, they're going to blow it off. They're not going to listen. So what are the other constructs? And I put them on the paper. But one of them, you can guess them. I think if you look at the paper, I listed them out for you, so there's no reason for me to be tricky about it. But we have science, we have law, we have history, we have culture, and we have harm. Did I get them all? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is a religious. Now, under religious, when we say religious, in a religious paradigm, sometimes, I intentionally try not to use the word paradigm, but it may come out. The reason I like to use the word paradigm is because it's cliche nowadays, okay? But in the past, we called these logical paradigms. That word has so been absconded by modern business practice that I don't like to use it, so we use a more modern word, which is called constructs. But paradigms and constructs are exactly the same thing in logic. So if you're reading your logic book, or you're reading a book of philosophy, when it talks about paradigms, this is what we are talking about. Paradigms are a way of looking at things. So, it's very, very important to note, if I'm working with somebody in a scientific paradigm, a scientific construct, where do I have to stay or need to stay to make my point?
Scientific method or historical?
Right. I have to stay in remember, scientific method, legal historical method, and logic are tools. So where can we apply them? Everywhere, because they're tools. But if I'm going to talk to someone about scientific things, or if I'm going to try to make an argument within a scientific construct, what do I have to stick with? the empirical, scientific, legal historical method and scientific method, if I begin bringing in other points, do I have a problem? I'm going to have a serious problem. Because number one, remember, in logic, definitions, assumptions, your argument, and your conclusions. If your definitions are different, what happens to your logical argument? It's destroyed. You can't begin. You have to have the same set of definitions. So, if I'm going to work with somebody, if I'm going to do like for example, this school here teaches science, but they also bring in Old Testament, New Testament. What is the definition that must precede that? I must define the Old Testament and New Testament as being pertinent within the scientific construct, right? I must make a definition that you will agree to, you see, that says that I can do that, right? Right? If I don't make that definition, if I don't have those same assumptions, what happens to my argument? Totally gone. So do you see this? So if I'm going to discuss things with people on using truth, I have to stick within the constructs. Very important to note, because under the law construct, anything goes. This is something that people really miss. I can make a law in this nation today that says we can put Lutherans to death. Just like Germany made a law that said they could put Jews to death. Or I have a law that says I can put babies to death. Oh, it's called abortion. Because under the legal construct, anything can be made a law. This is very important to note. If you are trying to argue under a legal construct, under the law construct, legal is better. I shouldn't say law. Legal. The problem with a legal construct is that anything can fit in a legal construct. So, that is one you want to stay away from. It doesn't mean you can't work within it, and I'm going to show you how you can work within it. We'll talk about that. It's important to know. We look at the historical construct. The historical construct is the scientific construct is a great one to work in. Great one to work in. The historical construct is very good to work in too. Why? It is what it is. There's a real problem in historical construct because as I've shown you in the classes we've had, remember, where do I teach the class? Remember, in my classes, I do not consider myself to be a Hebrew scholar. I consider myself to be a Greek. I know Greek, ancient Greek. I do not know Quinian Greek. I'm not a Quinian Greek kind of guy. But when I teach my New Testament classes, where do I teach them from? From a historical construct. What I try to present to you is what we can prove historically and only historically. What we know linguistically. Because within the historical construct is also what? Linguistics, culture. Well, we'll talk about cultural construct too. But all these things are what they are. And so there may be some disagreement between historians about what something means within their opinion, or even what something might have been within their opinion.